It's great to be with you again, Tabernacle family, on this week's midweek message. Before we really get into it, though, a big word of thanks to those of you who came out this past Sunday to both the 9 o'clock and the 11 o'clock service. What a joy it was to be with you. And really, that was the constant refrain that I heard as people came in. The smiles were contagious, and people just so much enjoying the fellowship that was able to happen again. It was good to see people out in the parking lot after the services, just lingering, in no great rush to leave or go home, but just really enjoying the presence of other believers. And we're looking forward to seeing more of that in the weeks to come. So that was wonderful. Thank you for all of you who came, and the greeters who were there setting up early, and the ushers kind of directing traffic there, and all the sound technicians, all the work behind the scene with that, and the musicians. Just a lot that went into it. Thank you. And may I say thank you to those of you who stayed home. Here's what I mean by that. There's a lot of you out there who really are looking forward to coming back. And we get that, and we appreciate it, and you have not yet felt the peace to do so. Understand you are known and you are loved. And we're not trying to play favorites here. We're not trying to look down the nose at anybody. And so thank you for all of you who have said, I really desire to come back, and just not quite yet. You are appreciated. We're all in this together, as the phrase has become common these days. So we do look forward to a couple things as well. Now that we are reassembled, we'll start taking steps forward again with the good handful of you that were in the membership class, and some of you who are looking forward towards baptism. That's going to be something we can eagerly anticipate in the weeks and months ahead. As well, we are very much looking forward to celebrating the Lord's Supper together. And again, the format might look a little bit different. We'll have individually wrapped elements there for you, and we're looking forward to doing that on July 5th, the 1st of July, the 1st of August, first Sunday that we're back together, things of that nature and such. So one more announcement. We have entered phase 3 as a county. That's wonderful news. Really the most specific impact that it has on us isn't really in regards to Sunday morning, because we're still at the same kind of space requirements there, 6 feet. What it does allow is for groups of 10 to now become groups of 25. So there's a particular note for our small groups that yes, all those same spacing requirements still are requirements for you. So if you're having everybody in the living room, it's going to be a little bit hard. But if you're having everybody in the backyard, well, now it's a little bit easier. And so everybody space out, have your 6-foot distance, have your masks on when appropriate, and groups of 25 are now approved. So all of that to say, let's get into the word. Psalm 15 is where we'll be at today. So again, if you have your Bible, and I'm sure most of you do, turn to Psalm 15. It's been a real pleasure just working our way through a great number of the Psalms with you, and there is simply no end to the amount of good things that you can draw and cultivate from this rich section of God's Word. As we begin to turn there, one of the things that comes to my mind is, are you asking the right questions? It is very important to get the right answers. But if you get the so-called right answers to the wrong questions, they remain the wrong answers because you've not asked the right question. And a lot of times as we go through life, we've simply not asked the questions that we need to ask. I mean, how much so when you young men and young women out there are looking for Mr. or Mrs. Right, and you find this beautiful young woman and your heart is set on her, and you bring her home, and your parents ask maybe different questions than you have asked. And maybe they say things like this: well, does she fear the Lord? I mean, just on Sunday we were talking about not being unequally yoked together, and what application that has for Christians marrying Christians, not an unbeliever. And maybe they ask things like this: well, does this person really have the type of character that you're looking for in a spouse? Will they be faithful to you till death do you part? Will this be the type of mother or the type of father that would be there for the long haul and join with you, partner with you in raising a godly heritage for the Lord? Well, maybe those questions didn't come into your mind, and you just see the moonlight glinting off her hair, and starry-eyed as you are, those are different questions, aren't they? Maybe yet again, you have different questions. You go to buy a new car, and the salesman tells you all the marvelous things about this car. Maybe he's not asking and answering the same questions that you are, and these things apply, frankly, in every area of life. Now, as we come to this psalm, it's entirely possible that you are asking the wrong questions, and that the questions that dominate your mind may be of immediate priority, but not of ultimate importance. Those things don't always align. We might have this hue and cry, and sometimes the questions that are being forced upon us are those of political expediency or economic expediency, and may not have ultimate interest. Well, here's what the psalmist says. Psalm 15, verse 1. This is a psalm of David. O Lord, who can sojourn in your tent? Who shall dwell on your holy hill? We could combine the two aspects of really that same question to say something like this. Dear God, who can come into your presence? Now that is an important question. That is the central question of the Reformation, frankly. And I understand we have 5 solas and a lot of things like that, but fundamentally, people were asking this: what does it mean to be right with God? What is required for us to be able to dwell with God? And the answer to that question looks like this. In fact, a lot of people have teased out 10 specifics in this psalm. They've seen it something as a reflection of the Decalogue, right? The 10 Commandments, as you will. I'm not entirely persuaded on that, and I'd really like to look at this psalm in its own light, but what you do see is that there is a moral and an ethical requirement to dwell with God. It kind of looks like this. If you're going to be in the temple of God, the tabernacle of God, the dwelling place of God, you're on holy ground. And where God is, there is his holy presence. So you need to be holy. You see this, say, like when Moses comes to the burning bush and God says, take your shoes off. You see this in Isaiah chapter 6, when Isaiah has this vision of God and the glory of the Lord fills the temple, and he says, I am a man of unclean lips. I dwell among a people of unclean lips. Here he is. My eyes have seen the King, right? Holy, holy, holy. That's the passage right there. So if you're going to go to the temple of the Lord, what does that look like? Now, what you would expect is some sort of decorum. For instance, if you were to go see a king today, you have certain policies, procedures that are required of you, a certain dress code that's expected of you. If you were to go into any realm in which you're meeting a highly important person, a highly decorous person, you act a certain way, don't you? And here it is, you're going into the very presence of God. You'd expect certain ceremonial requirements, and you hear them in the Old Testament. What's surprising is that it's nowhere in this psalm. The psalm is not saying, offer these sacrifices. It's not saying, do these certain rituals and rites. It's saying, this type of person is able to dwell with the Lord. Here's the first requirement. It's in verse 2. He who walks blamelessly. Now, your translation might have something like this. Who is a person of integrity. It's a good translation. Same word can easily be translated both ways. The fundamental idea here is that you could really translate this word, he who is all-encompassing, he who is complete or whole. The idea would be that all of your life is given to God. So the person who comes to God is not the person who offers lip service to God. The person who comes to God is not the person who is able to, quote, make these certain sacrifices. That's not what God looks for. In fact, Micah 6:6-8, or Isaiah 33, 14-16, has this idea, what does the Lord require of you? If you offer these rivers of oil and just these mountains of sacrifices, is that really what the Lord wants? No. Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly, with your God? That's what God requires of you. Or in this text, that you would live a righteous life. We go to the next thing here. Not only that you have a blameless life, you have no handles whereby people pull you down, that this is an all-encompassing thing. Well, what is all-encompassing of your life? Namely, that you live in a righteous manner, that your actions correspond to the will of God, that whatever he says, you do it. Mary got this, John chapter 2. She says in regards to Jesus, her son, whatever he says, do it. That's righteousness. We say this is the will of God. This is the way of truth. Walk ye in it. So the first thing is, if you want to approach God, then all of your life is conformed to the will of God. There is not one area of your life which is out of conformity to the will of God. We give some specific examples as we continue. Here's the next one. He speaks truth in his heart and does not slander with his tongue, does no evil to his neighbor, and does not take up a reproach against his friend. A lot of speech crimes right here, aren't there? Where this person, the right speech comes, did you notice that, from his heart? The idea is not so much that in his inner person he's so right. Well, of course he is. The point is that in his outer speech, that's a reflection of the inner person, he is speaking words that are full of peace, that are very sincere in his heart, right? That he's speaking things that are not duplicitous. That phrase, he does not slander. Really, there's no English equivalent for this word right here. The idea to speak this kind of a word against someone was to compromise their standing in the community. Not just, this is a reproach against you. It's just so much more than that. It's the type of thing where you're in uttering this level of a curse against someone, all the people in that social circle would therefore ostracize that person. That their whole social network, therefore, is compromised. You've done a great harm to this person. You, with your words, have cut them off. The closest equivalent we have today is probably seen in social shaming, where a person does something and you, probably without really investigating the person, probably without really understanding the nuance involved, are able to take to Twitter like a ninja of minuscule verbiage and completely cut them off from their community. Now, maybe the things that you say are right and true, but think of how you say it, and more fundamentally, is it true? Do you really even know the whole story? Isn't it easy to be reactionary? I would strongly caution all of you on the use of your social media. We live in an era of outrage. May that not be true of you. Notice what I'm not saying. I am not saying that if you see something evil, you remain silent. I'm not saying that. I am saying that it's far too easy to pile on. And that when you have all these people piling on, the herd mentality kicks in, doesn't it? And you pile on, and you look good when you do it. Oh, you look good. And so as you are able to have all of this virtue lived large before the world, what have you really done? And have you really spoken the truth? And have you really handled the nuance of the situation? Or were you simply content to get some likes on your little comment that you made? Well, think through those things. Because the righteous person doesn't utter this type of word that just ruins people socially. Think through the implications of that in the way that you interact with the culture at large and with the people that you know. It may be that this is so difficult for you, that you are so attuned to putting out your certain digs in the wide, wide world, that you may need to stop putting things out in the wide, wide world because you have not yet learned how to do so in the spirit of grace and meekness. And yet speak the truth. Here comes the next one. In whose eyes a vile person is despised, I'm in verse 4. but who honors the Lord, but who honors those who fear the Lord. Now, when we first hear this, this almost seems, unseemly to us. You say, wait a second. You mean to say that a righteous person is defined by despising bad people and honoring good people? Simply, the answer is, well, yes, of course. In many places in the Bible, you'll hear things like this. The fear of the Lord is to hate evil. You'll hear things like this. God is angry with the wicked every day. That kind of offends our sensibilities, doesn't it? We're so used to saying, well, God is love, God is love. And you read something like this, and you're like, whoa, hold on, hold everything. Well, we do serve the God who, at the end of the day, sends people to hell for all eternity. Let's not sugarcoat that. That there is an objective standard of righteousness, and odds are, if you're honest with yourself, you don't meet the standard. And where we split up the world into these so-called good guys and bad guys, odds are both good guys and both bad guys have a lot of room to grow. And so if you are posturing in such a way that this certain group does no evil, you need to check yourself. And if you're posturing in this certain way that this certain group of people does no good, you probably need to check yourself again. It's so easy. Jesus came and there were Pharisees and Sadducees, and Jesus roundly condemned them both as they both condemned each other. And if Jesus were here today, I'm pretty sure he'd do the same thing, because there's enough fault to go around, and people are still yet made in the image of God. There is enough good to go around. However, when a society begins to look at a certain evil and no longer have the character to call that evil, then they as a society sanction that which is evil. We cannot do that. We cannot do that. Well, let's be a little specific, right? So if a criminal does a criminal deed, we can't say, well, because this horrific end happened to the criminal, we no longer look at the criminality of their conduct. Why would we say that? Can't we be truthful? Or if we say that there is a tendency in a given community to tend to maybe hedge on the facts a little bit, well, because they hedged on the fact, they were able to achieve a certain outcome. You can't condemn or condone things that are right or wrong, right? You need to be able to speak honestly about that which is wrong and say, if you have shaded the truth, it is wrong. Honestly about that which is right and say, if you are here to do right, we commend you. Now, this has all manner of personal implication here as well. Are you living righteously in your present circumstance? Think about your verbiage. We're talking about speech right now, as it applies to the things that you do in your job. Have you been tempted to shade the truth? Have you been tempted to, frankly, deceive? It turns to gravel in your mouth. Be careful on that. We're going to finish up these righteous edicts, really, with a thought about finances. It comes this way. At the end of verse 4, who swears to his own hurt and does not change, who does not put out his money at interest, he does not take a bribe against the innocent. All those things kind of coalesce right there, although there's different nuance to be sure. When it's talking about does not put out his money at interest, this is not a strict prohibition against any form of putting out your money and getting interest. The fact of the matter is, the Jewish people were permitted to do that to the Gentile world. Jesus also talks about this in his parable. He says, shouldn't you have put your money in a bank and gotten interest for it, as opposed to burying it in the ground? But in this ancient world, there are different examples of people putting out their money at like 33% interest, at 50% interest. And this is not, say, commercial lending. The idea would be someone was really in a desperate strait if they needed this. Say, for instance, the crops failed this year, and you really need money so that you can make the crops go next year. Well, try to do that at 50% interest. So this is predatory. And so the idea here is that your money is simply a God-given resource to be used to accomplish God-given goals and tasks. So how are you using your money? In America, boy, we have a classic sin of greed. We so commonly overlook that. I need to land the plane. Here's where we need to come away with some of these things. The final point says, those who do these things shall never be moved. And the promise is not that if you are living like this, no evil will ever befall you. Of course, good people die as well, and good people sometimes go broke and sometimes get overrun by the Huns if you live in Rome. Like, these things happen to good people, right? The point is that there is no more solid foundation on which to build your life. Therefore, you'll not be moved. This is the rock. But we come away from this with a real problem. Because Jesus says, who can ascend my holy hill? And the answer is, well, a righteous person. But if you read the Psalms, then you would have just got done reading Psalm 14. Well, what does Psalm 14 say? It says this, verse 2, the Lord looks down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there are any who understand, who seek after God. They have all turned aside. Together they've become corrupt. There's none who does good, not even one. I mean, think of Romans 3. This is horrible news. So we come to a psalm like this, and our first tendency is this. Yeah, I am that righteous guy. Wasn't it? Wasn't that your goal? Like, going through this whole thing, like, oh, maybe I could tweak that, maybe I could tweak this, but I am that righteous person. I'll ascend that hill of the Lord. I'll see you on Sunday. Yeah. Me too. And yet, we need to be honest with God's honesty and say that, well, I can't do this. So when you read Psalm 14 or when you read Psalm 15, it really points to the righteous man, but to the ultimate righteous man. That's Jesus Christ, the one who lived the life we should have lived and didn't, and therefore died the death, made the ultimate ritual sacrifice that we might have that entrance. You read a psalm like this and you say, dear God, I need Jesus. That's the ultimate application right here. The secondary application is something like this. And dear Lord, may I be conformed yet more and more into the image of his dear Son. Jesus did all of these things. You are called to do all of these things. And as you live this life of ultimate dependence on the ultimate righteous man, may you grow in all of these things. Who can be in the presence of the Lord? The one who is in Christ, becoming more and more like Christ. May we be more like him today.